The heavy doors of a high-end establishment swing open. Vincent Calderone steps out, looking immaculately dressed in a black suit, radiating wealth and danger. Suddenly, Imani Williams, a small girl in a pink shirt and blue pants, breaks through the crowd and runs toward him. Vincent's security detail tenses up, stepping in to intercept her. Vincent raises a hand, sharply stopping his men. He looks down, his expression shifting from annoyance to shock. The child reveals the object of value, the money. The stakes, mom is taken. And the hopelessness, police won't help. Vincent crouches down on the dirty sidewalk to be at eye level with her. Imani is trembling, tears streaming down her face. She holds up a shaking hand, revealing a crumpled $5 bill. Imani dialogue, my daddy owed bad men. Now they took my mommy. Imani dialogue, the police said they can't help. Please, is this enough to hire you? In the background, an older man walks past, blurry and out of focus, unaware of the life or death moment happening right next to him. Vincent Calderone had one rule that kept him alive for 20 years. Never get involved with civilians. But what this terrified 7-year-old offered him wasn't just $5. It was an offer that would change the rules of the game forever. Stay to the end to see how the city's most feared man went to war. For a fee of just $5. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. Vincent Calderone stepped out of his black armored SUV, the heavy door thudding shut with the finality of a bank vault. The evening air was biting, smelling of exhaust and expensive cologne. He adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke suit, his eyes scanning the street with the practiced indifference of a man who owned everything he looked at. His security detail, 2 massive men who moved like shadows, flanked him instantly, creating a wall of muscle between the boss and the world. Then the perimeter broke. It wasn't a rival hitman or a police raid that breached the line. It was a blur of bright pink cotton. Get back, his lead guard barked, his hand flying inside his jacket toward a shoulder holster. The movement was instinctual, lethal, and fast. The guard stepped forward to intercept the threat, his body becoming a human shield. Hold. Vincent's voice cut through the tension like a razor. Vincent didn't recoil. He froze. His eyes locked onto the small object thrust toward him, hovering just inches from his silk tie. It wasn't a knife. It wasn't a gun. It was a $5 bill. It was crumpled, worn soft at the edges, and shaking violently in a tiny dark hand. Vincent looked past the money to the girl holding it. Imani Williams stood there, her chest heaving, tears cutting clean tracks through the dust on her cheeks. She looked no older than 7, drowning in a pink t-shirt and blue pants that had seen better days. She was trembling so hard her sneakers seemed to vibrate against the pavement. An old man shuffled past in the background, head down, completely oblivious to the collision of 2 different worlds happening mere feet away. Slowly, deliberately, Vincent did the unthinkable. The man who ruled the city from penthouse suites and VIP booths lowered himself to the dirty concrete. He crouched, ignoring the protest of his Italian wool trousers and the confused glances of his men, until he was perfectly eye level with the child. The noise of the city seemed to drop away, leaving only the sound of Imani's ragged breathing. Vincent looked at the money, then up into her wide, terrifyingly innocent eyes. He saw a fear there that he recognized, the kind of fear that comes when you have absolutely nothing left to lose. She swallowed hard, pushing the crumpled bill closer to his chest, her voice cracking under the weight of a desperation no child should ever know. Please, she whispered, the word hanging in the cold air. My daddy said you're the boss. He said you fix things. She took a jagged breath, her eyes searching his face for any sign of mercy. Is this enough? Is this enough to hire you? Vincent stared at the crumpled $5 bill, his mind racing through 15 years of hard-learned lessons. He had held on to the East Side for a decade and a half, not by being the most violent man in the room, but by being the most disciplined. His operation was built on invisible lines and ironclad agreements. You paid your dues, you kept your mouth shut, and you never, under any circumstances, brought civilians into the crossfire. Especially not children. Children were complications. They were witnesses. They were the one line that separated a businessman from a monster. By all rights, he should have stood up, brushed the dust from his knees, and signaled his men to remove her. But he didn't. What's your name? Vincent asked. his voice dropping to a gravelly murmur that barely carried over the wind. Imani, she squeaked, wiping her nose on her sleeve. Imani Williams. Okay, Imani. You want to hire me? That means this is business. He gestured to the money without taking it. Who are the bad men? Who took your mother? Imani took a shaky breath, her eyes darting to the massive bodyguards hovering behind Vincent before locking back onto his face. They came to the house. They said Daddy owed them. They said Daddy died without paying, so the debt is ours now. She swallowed hard, the memory clearly terrifying her. They said it was $20,000. Mama cried. She showed them the bank app on her phone, but they just laughed. Vincent's jaw tightened. 20,000. To him, that was a rounding error on a Tuesday night dinner. To a widow and her child, it was a death sentence. Who are they? Vincent pressed, his eyes narrowing. The loud men, Imani whispered, leaning in as if saying the name would summon them. The ones with the spider tattoos on their necks. The Russo men. The name hit Vincent like a physical blow. The Russo Syndicate. They weren't organized crime. They were bottom feeders. Scavengers who picked the carcasses of desperate neighborhoods. Vincent had tolerated their existence on the fringes of the city because they stayed in their lane, low-level drug pushing and petty theft. But this? Kidnapping a widow over a dead man's gambling debt? That wasn't business. That was chaos. Vincent looked at the girl. She wasn't just a victim of bad luck. She was a victim of a system that had failed to protect her from wolves. The Russos were sloppy, cruel, and devoid of the code that Vincent lived by. They had broken the rules of the game. And now, staring at a $5 bill offered by a trembling hand, Vincent realized that the game was about to change. Vincent watched a shiver ripple through Imani's small frame, a tremor that had less to do with the biting wind and more to do with a hunger she was trying to hide. Her eyes were hollow, rimmed with the dark circles of exhaustion that no child should possess. Where have you been staying? Vincent asked, his voice low, demanding the truth even though he was afraid to hear it. If your mother has been gone, who is taking care of you? Imani stared at her worn sneakers, her voice barely a whisper. Just me. I locked the door like Mama said. I didn't answer it for anyone. She paused, her fingers nervously twisting the hem of her dirty pink shirt. I had some crackers. And a jar of peanut butter. But I finished the crackers yesterday. Silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. 3 days. She had been sitting alone in the dark for 3 days, surviving on crumbs and terror, listening to the creaks of an empty apartment while her mother was in the hands of butchers. Vincent felt a cold knot tighten in his chest. It wasn't pity, it was rage. A precise, molten anger at the indignity of it. In his territory on his watch, a child was starving in silence. He looked at the $5 bill she was still extending toward him. Her lifeline, her fortune, offered up to a stranger in a suit. Imani, Vincent asked, his gaze piercing. There are police stations. There are teachers. Why did you come to me? Imani looked up, tears brimming in her eyes again, but her gaze held steady. Mrs. Chun, she said. At the corner store. Vincent stiffened. He knew Mrs. Chun. She paid him protection money on the first of every month, usually sliding the envelope across the counter with averted eyes and a trembling hand. Mrs. Chun said the police wouldn't come in time, Imani explained, her voice gaining a desperate strength. She said you own these streets. She said you are a bad man. Vincent's security guard shifted uncomfortably, but Vincent didn't blink. But she said you are the only bad man that the Russo brothers are afraid of. Imani took a step closer, looking up at him as if he were a giant. She said you are the only one who can make them stop. Vincent felt the air leave his lungs. He had spent 20 years building a reputation as a predator, a man to be feared and avoided. He had carved his empire out of violence so that no one would dare cross him. He never imagined that to a little girl with nowhere else to turn, that darkness would look like safety. She didn't want a hero. She wanted a monster scarier than the ones who took her mother. Mrs. Chun talks too much, Vincent murmured, though the harshness had bled out of his voice. He looked at the blurred figure of the old man walking away in the distance, the symbol of a city that didn't care. Then he looked back at Imani, who was waiting for a verdict. She's right though, he said softly. Vincent slowly rose to his full height, his knees cracking slightly in the cold dampness of the evening. The shift in perspective was jarring. He was no longer eye level with the trembling child but towering over her like a dark skyscraper. He looked down at the crumpled $5 bill in Imani's hand, then reached out and took it. He folded the worn currency with the same precision he used for $1,000 stacks and slid it into his breast pocket, right over his heart. "You have a deal," Vincent said, his voice flat and final. "You hired a professional, Imani. And professionals get to work." He turned on his heel, the empathy vanishing from his face to be replaced by the cold, hard mask of the boss. He looked at his head of security, a hulking man named Marco who had watched the entire exchange with a mixture of confusion and unease. "Get the car," Vincent commanded, checking his watch. "And call Sal. Tell him to rally the crew at the warehouse. I want the SUVs and I want full weapons loadout. Vests, rifles, the works." Marco blinked, his earpiece buzzing faintly. "Boss? We're calling in the heavy crew? For a collection run." "Not collection," Vincent corrected, buttoning his jacket. "Extraction." Marco hesitated, a rare breach of protocol that showed just how rattled he was. "Vincent, with all due respect, we're talking about mobilizing the organization. For a kid? If the other families here were going to war over a stray $5 and a sob story, we look weak. We look emotional." Vincent stopped dead. The air around him seemed to drop 10 degrees. He turned his head slowly, fixing Marco with a stare that could peel paint. "The Russos are kidnapping women in my territory," Vincent said, his voice dangerously quiet. "They are leaving children to starve in apartments 3 blocks from where I eat dinner. They are sloppy. They are loud. And they are operating without my permission." He glanced back at Imani, who was watching him with wide, hopeful eyes, totally unaware of the violence he was about to unleash on her behalf. "We aren't going to war for a kid, Marco," Vincent lied, though they both knew it was a lie. "We're cleaning up the neighborhood. I don't like rats in my kitchen." Marco swallowed hard, nodding once. He tapped his earpiece. "Sal, get the boys. We're moving out. Green light on the Russos." Vincent looked back at the shop behind him. He gestured to Mrs. Chun, who was watching fearfully through the glass. "Put the girl inside with Chun. Tell her to lock the doors and not open them for anyone but me. Make sure she eats." As Marco moved to usher Imani to safety, Vincent walked toward his armored SUV. The engine roared to life, a deep guttural growl that matched the feeling in his chest. He had broken his code. He had involved a civilian. But as he touched the outline of the $5 bill in his pocket, he didn't feel weak. For the first time in years he felt dangerous. The back room of the Bella Vista restaurant was usually reserved for high-stakes poker and celebratory dinners, but tonight it smelled of gun oil and tension. 37 men stood in absolute silence, forming a perimeter around the long mahogany table. These weren't street corner thugs. They were the city's most efficient predators, ex-military, former tactical officers, and enforcers who had spent years refining the art of violence. Vincent walked in and the room seemed to shrink. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He simply unrolled a blueprint across the table, smoothing the edges with a calm hand. "The Russo container yard," Vincent said, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "Intelligence says they're holding a hostage in the shipping office. Sector 4. Sal, a scar-faced lieutenant who had been with Vincent since the beginning, leaned forward. "A hostage, boss? Are we doing an extraction or a hit?" "We are doing a surgical removal of a tumor," Vincent replied, his eyes scanning the faces of his men. "We go in silence. Silencers and dark corners. The Russo crew is sloppy, but they are heavily armed. If they hear us coming, the hostage dies. And that is not an option." He looked up, locking eyes with Sal. "The woman comes out alive. Anyone standing in her way does not." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. They didn't ask why. They didn't ask who the woman was. If Vincent Calderone said they were going to war, they went to war. Suddenly, the phone in Vincent's breast pocket vibrated against his ribs. A harsh, buzzing intrusion right behind the pocket where Imani's $5 bill rested. Vincent pulled it out. Unknown number. He tapped the screen and a video file opened. The room went dead silent as he hit play. The grainy footage showed a woman, Clarissa Williams, tied to a rusted metal chair in a dimly lit container. Her face was bruised, her lips split, and her eyes were wide with animal panic. A man's voice, rough and mocking, jeered from behind the camera. "Tell your husbands goes to pay up, honey. Or we start sending pieces of you to the daughter." Vincent's grip on the phone tightened until his knuckles turned white. The Russos thought this was a negotiation tactic. They thought sending a proof-of-life video would scare the family into finding money that didn't exist. They had no idea they had just sent their death warrant to the wrong phone number. Vincent turned the screen outward, holding it up so every man in the room could see the terror on Clarissa's face. "Look at them," Vincent whispered, the rage finally bleeding into his voice. "They threaten widows. They hunt children. Tonight, we remind them why they should have stayed in the gutter." He slipped the phone back into his pocket. "Move out." The convoy cut through the industrial district like a streak of black oil, silent and lethal. 3 SUVs moved in tight formation, their headlights doused, navigating by the ambient glow of the city smog. Inside the lead vehicle, Vincent checked the slide of his custom pistol. The metal was cold against his palm, a familiar weight that had settled disputes and enforced contracts for over a decade. It was a tool of his trade, no different from a carpenter's hammer. But tonight the tool felt different. Tonight it felt like a gavel. They reached the container yard at midnight. It was a rusted maze of corrugated steel and shadows, lit by flickering halogen bulbs that buzzed like dying insects. The Russo crew was sloppy. Their perimeter guards were bored, leaning against forklifts and scrolling through phones, confident in their cruelty. They assumed the world was afraid of them. They didn't know the world had just arrived at their front gate. "Teams 1 and 2, Vincent whispered into his comms. "Paint the floor. Silence only." The takedown was a masterclass in professional violence. Vincent's men spilled out of the vehicles like smoke. There were no shouted commands, no wasted movements. Just the soft thwip of suppressed rounds and the heavy, wet thuds of bodies hitting the gravel. The guard by the gate dropped before the cherry of his cigarette hit the ground. The one on the phone never even looked up. Vincent stepped out of the SUV, moving through the shadows with a predator's grace. He stepped over a fallen Russo enforcer without breaking stride. His eyes fixed on the central office container ahead. As he stacked up against the cold steel of a shipping crate, waiting for Sal to secure the flank, Vincent felt the crinkle of the $5 bill in his breast pocket. It pressed against his ribs, heavier than the body armor, heavier than the gun. For 15 years, he had justified his sins with the logic of the market. He killed because it was necessary for stability. He hurt people because they threatened his bottom line. It was cold arithmetic, nothing personal, just business. But as he listened to the muffled laughter coming from inside the container, the laughter of men who thought tormenting a widow was sport, the math dissolved. "I have killed for profit," Vincent thought, his grip tightening on the weapon. "I have killed for territory. I have killed for pride." He watched Sal give the hand signal clear. "But I have never killed for justice." The realization didn't make him hesitate. It sharpened him. The icy detachment that usually shielded his soul melted away, replaced by a terrifying white-hot clarity. He wasn't just a mob boss tonight. He was the monster under the bed for the men who hurt children. "Breach," Vincent commanded. The door to container 15 didn't open. It disintegrated. Vincent's boot hit the rusted lock with the force of a battering ram, the metal screeching in protest as it gave way. Before the echo died, Sal and Marco were inside, their rifles sweeping the room with mechanical precision. The Russo brothers, Dimitri and his younger, thicker brother, scrambled backward, knocking over a card table. Poker chips scattered across the dirty floor like plastic hail. In the corner, tied to a chair and gagged, Clarissa Williams squeezed her eyes shut, shrinking away from the sudden violence. "Vincent!" Dimitri shouted, his hands shooting up in surrender. "Easy. Hold fire. We're businessmen here." Vincent stepped into the harsh fluorescent light, his custom pistol held loose at his side. He looked immaculate in his suit, a stark contrast to the grime and squalor of the human trafficking den. He didn't shout. He didn't sweat. He just stared. "Businessmen," Vincent repeated, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. "It's a misunderstanding about boundaries, Don Calderone," Dimitri stammered, sweat beading on his forehead as he eyed the laser sights dotting his chest. We didn't know you wanted a piece of this action. Look, the woman, she's leverage. Her family will pay. We get the money, we split it. 60-40. You take 60. Just for walking in the door. That's respect, right? Vincent looked at Clarissa, seeing the bruises on her arms, then back to the sweating man who thought a mother's life was a negotiable asset. You think this is about territory? Vincent asked quietly. Everything is about territory, Dimitri insisted, forcing a desperate smile. We can work this out. 60-40 is a good deal. Vincent reached into his breast pocket. But instead of a weapon, he pulled out the crumpled $5 bill. He held it up, the small worn piece of currency looking absurdly small in the violent room. You're right. It is about money, Vincent said. But you've been outbid. Dimitri blinked, confused. What? $5? You're joking. A 7-year-old girl gave me this, Vincent said, his voice terrifyingly calm. She stood on a freezing sidewalk and gave me everything she owned to save her mother from animals like you. She hired me, Dimitri. And my rates for pest control are non-negotiable. Realization dawned on Dimitri's face. The horror of understanding he had crossed a line that no amount of money could fix. Vincent, wait. It was just business. The debt is paid, Vincent interrupted, raising his weapon. And the girl hired new management. There was no hesitation, no dramatic pause. Just two distinct cracks of thunder that filled the small room. The Russo brothers fell before the sound faded. Vincent holstered his gun and walked past the bodies without a downward glance. He knelt beside Clarissa, pulling a knife to cut her bonds. Mrs. Williams, he said gently, his voice shifting from executioner to guardian. Let's go. Imani is waiting. The fluorescent lights of Mrs. Chen's corner store hummed with a sterile electric buzz, a stark contrast to the darkness Vincent had just left behind. He stood by the glass door, watching as Clarissa Williams stumbled into the aisle, her shoes scuffing against the linoleum. She was bruised, exhausted, and trembling, but she was alive. At the back of the store, sitting on a crate of soda bottles, Imani looked up. For a second, the world seemed to stop. Then, with a cry that tore through the quiet shop, Imani launched herself across the room. Mama! Clarissa dropped to her knees, catching her daughter just as they collided. The force of the embrace nearly knocked them both over. Imani buried her face in her mother's neck, sobbing with a raw, unfiltered relief that made Vincent look away. He adjusted his cuffs, suddenly feeling like an intruder. He dealt in debts, leverage, and silence. This kind of loud, messy love was a language he hadn't spoken in years. After a long moment, Clarissa pulled back, checking Imani's face, her hands shaking as she touched her daughter's hair. Then she looked up at the man in the black suit standing by the door. Her eyes held a mixture of fear and profound gratitude. Thank you, she whispered, her voice cracking. I don't know who you are. But thank you. Vincent didn't answer her. Instead, he walked over and crouched down, once again bringing himself eye level with the 7-year-old in the pink shirt. Imani wiped her eyes, sniffing loudly. She looked from her mother to Vincent, her small face serious. Vincent reached into his breast pocket and pulled out the crumpled $5 bill. He smoothed it out against his knee, treating the worn currency with more respect than he had shown the thousands of dollars in the Russo warehouse. He held it out to her. Here, Vincent said softly. Payment refunded. Imani hesitated, her brow furrowing. But, I hired you. You did the job. I did, Vincent nodded. But I decided to work pro bono tonight. That means free of charge. You keep this for the next time you need to take care of your mom. Imani took the money, her fingers brushing against his calloused hand. She stared at him, searching his face with that same piercing intensity she had shown on the sidewalk. She didn't see the criminal kingpin or the violence he was capable of. She just saw the man who had kept his word. Mr. Vincent, she asked quietly, are you a good guy? Vincent paused. He thought about the men lying on the floor of Container 15. He thought about the empire he had built on fear and the blood that would never wash off his hands. He stood up, looking down at the only two people in the city who looked at him without terror. I'm whatever I need to be, kid, Vincent said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. But tonight? Tonight I got to be. 15 years can change the skyline of a city, burying old secrets under new steel and glass, but some things remain written in stone. Imani Williams stood at the front of her second-grade classroom, wiping chalk dust from her hands. She was taller now, possessing a quiet confidence that replaced the trembling fear of the girl in the pink shirt. When a student in the back row dropped his lunchbox and began to cry, fearful of being scolded, Imani didn't raise her voice. She knelt down, crouching to his eye level just as a man in a black suit had done for her a lifetime ago. "It's okay," she whispered, helping him gather his things. "We can fix this." Later that evening, as the autumn wind swept leaves across the pavement, Imani walked to the familiar mailbox on the corner. It was the anniversary. It was always the anniversary. She pulled a small cream-colored envelope from her bag. Inside there was no letter, no long explanation of how she had finished college or how she was teaching children to be brave. There was only a crisp new $5 bill and a sticky note with 2 words, "Retainer fee." Across the city, in the back office of the Bella Vista restaurant, an old man sat in a leather chair that had molded to his frame over decades. Vincent Calderone's hair was silver now, and the lines on his face were etched deep like a roadmap of hard choices. He moved slower, but his eyes were still sharp, still dangerous. His head of security, Marco's son now, placed the envelope on the mahogany desk. Vincent opened it with hands that had once held the fate of the East Side in a vice grip. He pulled out the $5 and smiled, a genuine expression that softened the harsh angles of his face. He didn't put the money in the safe. He stood up, walking to the wall behind his desk. There, framed in simple black wood, was a collage of $5 bills. 15 of them. They weren't trophies of conquest. They were reminders of the only contract that had ever truly mattered. Vincent looked at the newest edition, thinking of the terrifying courage it took for a 7-year-old to stand before a monster and demand justice. He had spent a lifetime believing that power came from the barrel of a gun or the weight of a name. But as he pinned the bill to the wall, Vincent finally understood the truth he had learned on that cold sidewalk. True power wasn't about being the thing that people feared in the dark. It was about being the one who turned on the light. Courage, he realized, didn't always roar. Sometimes it was just a small voice shaking in the cold, holding out everything it had and refusing to back down. And sometimes that was enough to save the world.